Welcome to 21st Sports Recap and Reaction for the Detroit Lions at the Minnesota Vikings in their Week 2 matchup, September 20th, 2015. And we're going to go over the scores and the stats and give a little breakdown and analysis. Let's get started in the first quarter. At about 4.5 minutes in, Teddy Bridgewater hit Kyle Rudolph for a 5-yard touchdown. Walsh added the extra point, and it was 7-0 Minnesota. That would remain the score through the first quarter until just over 30 seconds into the second quarter when Teddy Bridgewater ran it in from a yard out, and the extra point from Walsh made it 14-0 Minnesota over Detroit. Then with about 7 minutes left before halftime, Matt Prater hit a 26-yard field goal for the Lions to put their first points on the scoreboard as they cut the Minnesota lead to 11 with the score Vikings 14, Lions 3. Then with about 2.5 minutes left before halftime, Blair Walsh hit a field goal, a 28-yarder for Minnesota to put them back up by 14 with the score 17-3, Vikings over the Lions. But then with less than a minute left, just over 30 seconds left before halftime, Matthew Stafford hit Megatron Calvin Johnson for an 11-yard touchdown pass as the Lions got into the end zone for the first time in this game. And with the extra point from Matt Prater, it was now a 7-point game with the score Minnesota 17, Detroit 10, as this game would go to halftime moments later. So then in the third quarter, with about 9 minutes left in the third, Zach Line ran it in from a yard out for a touchdown, and the extra point was no good, and so it was 23-10 as Minnesota was now up by 13 as they extended their lead over Detroit. So then in the fourth quarter, with about 6.5 minutes left in this game, Blair Walsh hit a 23-yard field goal, extending Minnesota's lead to 16 with the score 26-10 Vikings over the Lions. The Lions would get back into the end zone with less than 2 minutes left to play when Matthew Stafford threw his second touchdown pass of the day. This one to the tight end Eric Ebron, a 12-yard touchdown pass, and it was now a 10-point game as they ended up missing the extra point. So it was 26-16 Minnesota over Detroit. And so now the Vikings would recover an onside kick attempt by the Lions, and then Adrian Peterson ran 19 yards, and Detroit was forced to burn their second timeout of the second half. Then Asiata from the Detroit 29 ran it 6 yards, and now the Lions used their final timeout, and then Jerick McKinnon ran it 3 yards, followed by a knee from Bridgewater, and this game came to a close as the Vikings held on to win, as they only allowed the Lions to score 16, and they put up 26. So final score 26-16, Minnesota over Detroit. And in this game, the Lions could not get anything going on the ground against a team that let up a huge performance just 6 days ago against the Niners. And the Lions on the other side let Adrian Peterson run wild all over them as he had 103 more yards in this game on the ground than he did on Monday night. So in this game, Teddy Bridgewater was 14 of 18. So he had a high completion percentage, and he had 153 passing yards and a touchdown, no interceptions. Matthew Stafford, 32 of 53 for 286 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 interception. The Lions were throwing the ball way too much. Stafford was the leading rusher with 4 carries for 20 yards, which is pretty pathetic. Abdullah had just 6 carries for 9 yards, Riddick just 1 carry for 5 yards, and Joique Bell 4 carries for 2 yards, as the Lions' running game could not get going at all. As I said, the Vikings, they looked like they couldn't stop the run to save their life last week, and then Detroit couldn't get anything going against them. And like I said, on the other side, Peterson who only had 31 rushing yards on Monday night. He had 134 in this game off of 29 carries. So he was somewhat of a workhorse for the Vikings in this game that you would expect him to be. And Bridgewater had 6 carries for 21 yards, including a touchdown run. So he ran in from a yard out. Peterson also had 2 receptions for 58 yards to be the leading receiver for the Vikings in terms of yards. Of course, the tight end, Kyle Rudolph, had 5 receptions, and he had 30 yards and 1 touchdown. Mike Wallace, 3 receptions and 38 yards. And we look at the kickers. Blair Walsh, 2 field goals, 2 for 2, and 2 for 3 on the extra points. He did miss an extra point. Prater, 1 for 1 on field goals and 1 for 1 on extra points. We look at the defense. Heidebo was the leading tackler with 7 tackles for Detroit. He also forced a fumble. And Ziggy Ansah had 6 tackles and a sack. And for Minnesota, Captain Motherland had 6 tackles and a forced fumble to be their leading tackler. And Everson Griffin had a sack for their defense's lone sack. And Tratu had the lone interception. In terms of first downs, Detroit actually had more first downs. They had 25 first downs to 20 for Minnesota. And we look at third down conversions. Both teams had a decent amount of third down conversions. Not necessarily the highest of percentages, but not that bad. Detroit 6 for 13 for 46%. Minnesota 7 for 14 for 50%. Both teams were 100% on fourth downs. The Lions were 2 for 2 on fourth downs, and the Vikings were 1 for 1. In terms of total net yards, the Vikings netted 350, the Lions netted 323. And on the ground, that's where there was the really glaring difference, is the Vikings netted 5 times the amount of yards on the ground as the Lions. They netted 199 yards in the ground. The Lions just 38. As I said, that was pretty pathetic by the Lions. I don't even know what to say. And in terms of passing yards, the Lions netted 285. Stafford was sacked once for a 1-yard loss. And the Vikings netted 151 as Bridgewater was sacked once for a 2-yard loss. And in the red zone, the Lions actually were 2 for 3 for a 66 conversion percentage down in the red zone. And the Vikings were just 3 of 6, converting just 50%. So it actually could have been a lot uglier on the scoreboard if the Vikings had converted more of their red zone opportunities. The Vikings had the ball 31 minutes and 6 seconds versus just 28 minutes and 54 seconds for the Lions, which is not really a big difference there on the time of possession. Like I said, really the difference was, up front, and especially in the running game on both sides of the ball, is Minnesota. Everything that they were doing wrong on Monday, they were doing right here on Sunday back home, is they were back in the friendly confines of the Twin Cities. In Detroit, their second straight road game, really ever since they started off hot in the first half against San Diego and then just fell apart in that game. It seems like they picked up almost where they left off. Is they just were not playing good at all. I mean, the little bit of a bright spot, I guess, was that you saw, Calvin Johnson get into the end zone. He had 10 catches for 83 yards, and Golden Tate 6 catches for 80 yards. Ebron 5 catches for 43 yards and a touchdown. But, I mean, they cannot win games if they're going to be throwing the ball 53 times and they're only going to rush it 16 times. You're only going to net 38 yards on the ground against the team that let Carlos Hyde have, I think it was 166 yards that he ran for on Monday night against them. And then they just let Peterson run all over him. And that was the thing, is Minnesota's offensive line looked abysmal on Monday night, but against the Lions, who are supposed to be a good defense, and they had been a good defense, but they ain't looking like a good defense so far. Mainly speaking out of frustration, because I really can't believe they're 0-2. Of course, like I said, they started off with 2 road games, tough road games, starting off in San Diego and then in Minnesota, but they're 0-2 now. And teams that are 0-2 have only made the playoffs 12% of the time. And the Vikings are now 1-1. Of course, it's a tough division there in the North. They both have to deal with the Packers and the Bears. Well, the Bears are the Bears, but the Lions at 0-2 are going to have their work cut out for them moving forward. Of course, they haven't even played a home game yet, and it's still September, but they're going to have to get into the win column and even up their record if they want to have a chance at making the playoffs this year. This is going to be a long season. It's going to be a hard road moving forward. And the Vikings, even it up at 1-1, although it's not like a huge difference, 0-2, 1-1, it doesn't seem. But really, every game counts when there's only 16 games, and the closer you can stay to 500 during the season, the better chance you have down the stretch as we get into the colder months later on down in November and in December, moving into January. So you cannot be below 500 and make the playoffs, so I'm saying. But let me know what you think in the comments section below, what you thought about this game, what you took away from it. Like I said, there's a lot of issues. Really, it's the running game is the big problem there in Detroit, and they need to find some kind of balance in their offense. Minnesota, on the other hand, they might want to even throw the ball a little more, actually, to find a little more balance on that aspect. But if they can play the way they did on Sunday against Detroit, then they should have some success in 2015 moving forward. Of course, like I said, it's still early on. There's so many more games to play. We've only seen 2, still 14 games each, in 15 more weeks. But let me know what you think in the comments section below. Definitely interested to read your thoughts and opinions. Thank you very much for listening. It is greatly appreciated. And I do hope that you had a good day and had a great weekend and enjoyed all the sports.